As the war in Ukraine drags on, U.S. President Donald Trump has shifted course, threatening Russia with severe tariffs unless a peace deal is reached within 50 days. European leaders are rallying behind a new weapons pipeline to Kiev, while Trump assures his base that no U.S. tax dollars will be spent. In response, the Kremlin expresses readiness for peace talks, but insists on full Ukrainian withdrawal from annexed territories and a NATO ban. Conditions, of course, Ukraine has rejected. Will Trump's ultimatum shift the war's trajectory? And how is Europe recalibrating its support? What prospects remain for real peace talks? We're going to try to answer some of these questions in this edition of In Depth with Mihal Al-Hamalawi. Stay tuned. According to the New York Times, faint signs of diplomatic momentum are re-emerging in efforts to end the Ukrainian war, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky proposed reviving Trump-brokered peace talks that had previously stalled. Zelensky called for discussions on a ceasefire, detainee exchanges, and the return of deported Ukrainian children, and offered direct meeting with President Putin. The Trump administration, after supplying air defense weapons and threatening sanctions on Russia's trading partners, has pushed for an unconditional ceasefire as a precondition. Although skepticism remains in Kiev over the prospects of a breakthrough, the weapons deal structures to involve European funding and U.S. supplies has bolstered Ukraine's negotiating position. New shipment of Patriot systems from Germany and 7 other NATO countries may help deter Russian escalation and create space for serious diplomacy, according to the New York Times.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said Kyiv has proposed to Moscow a new round of peace talks next week. This comes a week after the United States President Donald Trump has issued a 50-day ultimatum to Moscow, reach a ceasefire agreement, or face sweeping new sanctions. The Kremlin, for its part, says it remains open to peace, but not at the cost of its goals, insisting Ukraine must withdraw from annexed regions and abandon its NATO aspirations. Talks may resume in Istanbul, but no date has been set. This comes amid intensified Russian strikes and ongoing Ukrainian drone responses. Kyiv has seen a sharp rise in overnight attacks, with missiles and drones setting buildings ablaze. In a major policy pivot, Trump also launched a new plan to supply American weapons to Ukraine without using U.S. tax dollars. Instead, European allies will bear the cost, purchasing U.S. arms and transferring them through NATO channels. Defense ministers from the UK and Germany are chairing a meeting to discuss the issue. Trump's new stance marks a clear shift from his earlier attempts to appease Russia. After months of failed diplomacy, he now backs tougher pressure, arming Ukraine while avoiding direct US spending and escalating the threatening language toward Russia. Whether this change lasts remains uncertain.
For more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist, and Mr. Ihab Omar, journalist and political researcher. Welcome to Q News, and I will start with you, Dr. Osman. Trump has reversed his earlier accommodating stance towards Moscow and is now threatening severe sanctions unless a ceasefire is reached within 50 days. What does this shift signal about U.S. strategic calculations?
Thank you for having me, Hala. Greetings to you, your guest, and the honorable audience. It seems that President Trump is rather, and I'm using his own words, disappointed in the Russian leadership or in President Vladimir Putin. He felt that he was over accommodating Russian needs and Russian demands in Ukraine and interests as well. Yet he felt that the Russians did not reciprocate. They took advantage of Trump's rapprochement, attempts of rapprochement with Russia in order to enhance their own battlefield position in Ukraine, taking advantage of the rolling back of U.S. military supplies and economic support for the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military. Now it seems that he is attempting to apply a more harsh stance on Russia, but in a very calculated way. We should never forget that the Senate, for example, was preparing one of the largest round of sanctions on Russia.
Yes.
However, Trump derailed the Senate's effort and replaced that with the proposal of imposing huge tariffs on Russia after the 50-day ultimatum expires, during which Russia should cease its hostilities in Ukraine, according to the U.S. ultimatum, at least. Why did President Trump go that way? It seems because he does not want to reach a point of no return with the Russians, meaning that if he approves a sanctions bill by the Senate, that means he cannot lift these sanctions on Russia without gaining the Senate's approval. And as you know, Russia is very unpopular in the U.S. Congress in general, among both Democrats and Republicans. So it would be very hard to do that. He's going the way, or just choosing the choice of the tariffs, because even if he imposes tariffs, he can lift them at any time through his presidential prerogative. And also he is now hinting, or he even announced that he will supply Ukraine with Patriot missiles. However, it's rather interesting that the United States said it will not pay any more money or any U.S. taxpayer dollars on the armament of Ukraine. They will not spend any money on that.
Yes.
And that the Europeans are the ones who will bear the costs. And as we have seen, several European governments, including France, for example, have expressed their reluctance to engage in that, while others, like Germany, for example, have declared their readiness to engage in this. So as you can see, even their support, the military support, the United States will give Ukraine is not game-changing, and it is rather minute and symbolic. I think what Trump is trying to do is trying to force Russia back on the negotiating table with more reasonable demands so that a resolution can be reached. Okay. Whether this will succeed, who knows?
Yes. Mr. Omar, Trump's pivot from a lenient approach to a hardline stance on Russia is a major political shift, as we explained earlier. How do you explain the reasons behind this shift?
Greetings to you and to your esteemed guest. Trump is returned strongly for the Russian president to approve his vision to end the war in Ukraine. But throughout the Russian media, during 2024, supporting Trump strongly in winning the U.S. elections on promises to have and lift or a lightened understanding between the two countries. And so it was a surprise for all observers, such a disagreement that was in the front faces between the two sides. And I think Putin's refusal to make a deal with Trump is the reason for Trump to change his opinion, as Putin's isn't agree of Ukrainians this year only, but Putin had requested a meeting with Trump to go on the context of the meeting and that took place following the Second World War, when the US and the USSR divided their influence throughout the world, not only in Germany and Korea, but talking about a full package related to all the related issues between Washington and Moscow. Putin is pursuing reaching an agreement of a like disagreement with Trump. Trump also wanted to agree only on Ukraine, but Putin wanted to reach an agreement with all the disagreement issues between Russia and the US. And I think that Putin will agree, or rather, Trump will agree Putin's vision. And in fact, there is attempts to holding a meeting in the upcoming center. So we're talking about less than 6 weeks ahead. All the media in the West started talking about an expected meeting between Putin and Trump. And Putin so that there is a disagreement between Trump and Zelensky and the EU, and therefore within such a period some issues will be solved militarily before heading to the talks, as in fact Russia in 2025 has entered zones in Ukraine on the ground for the first time militarily, following 1 year of training in the time of Biden's. And it's enough that Russia had expelled some Ukraine and won some of the eastern area zones, and therefore for Putin's interest to prolong the war and to show his reluctance with respect to Ukraine's file in order for Trump to agree of having a comprehensive meeting between the US and Russia that would lead in a comprehensive agreement not only for ending the war but for the disagreement between Russia and Putin. And Putin also realized if Ukraine will cease, so America will be free for other issues related to Russia and China. And for interest of Russia to show its strength in several fronts. So it is a very complicated scene of geopolitical and complicated issues, so not for in favor of Putin to end the war unilaterally, but require a comprehensive agreement with respect to all the disagreements.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Osman, Trump is now backing arms deliveries to Ukraine on the condition that European allies pay. This suggests let's say, realignment of transatlantic responsibilities or just a shift in political optics?
I think it's a precedent because before that, even during the latest NATO summit in The Hague, which Trump attended, he succeeded in pushing forward his demands that NATO countries increase their military spending to constitute 5% of their total GDPs. Mm-hmm. And I think that he now is establishing a new precedent where other NATO countries will bear a larger portion of the burden of the military alliance's expenses, meaning that the alliance cannot be as over-reliant as it once was on
during
US.
the Biden administration or before Trump.
The entire history of NATO.
Yes.
The entire history of NATO, the biggest contributor was the United States. The military budget of the United States, by the way, Hala, is probably larger or at least equal to the other NATO countries combined. The United States military budget is over $1 trillion, $1,000 billion. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine that's the largest military budget in history,
exactly.
in human history even.
Yes.
So it is something that is unprecedented. Now, because the US needs more of its assets at home, needs less military involvement abroad, and wants to contain China in East and South Asia, it wants the Europeans to pitch in more. And now with the armament of Ukraine, it is conditional. Trump is saying, I will supply them with Patriot missiles and other defensive equipment, and maybe even more. Some reports said
but
that
they have to pay.
But the Europeans will have to bear the cost.
Yes.
And of course, this adds an extra burden on the Europeans who are now compelled to spend more on their militaries to accommodate Trump, and also because they feel that Russia basically outmatches them. You know, Hala, and this is what Mark Rutte has said. Russia's military production is 3 times the volume of the military production of NATO. Russia has a phenomenal military production industrial base, even though the Russian economy is way smaller and weaker than the European Union or the United States. But it seems that Russia, due to the structure of its government and its vast natural resources and huge military and industrial infrastructure, has managed to mobilize its resources to create a war economy, which makes it a formidable opponent that the Europeans feel very threatened by at the moment. So I believe it is more of a realignment now of NATO, where European powers like Germany and France and the United Kingdom will have to play a more proactive role, increase their military spending, and also bear a larger burden of defense responsibilities in NATO. However, this comes with its own challenges because this will basically strangle or strain the economies of these countries, which are already strained. But Trump, to be honest, can care less about this at the end of the day.
Exactly.
And also, there's a very important point Mr. Ihab pointed out, and that is the Russians looking forward to a possible summit, with a tripartite summit rather, between Chinese President Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, and the US President Trump. Trump has been invited to attend the 80th anniversary of China's victory in World War II, which will be attended by Vladimir Putin and many other world leaders. If Trump does attend, there are reports that there might be a tripartite summit. And now we might be seeing a new Potsdam conference or a new Yalta conference, where the 3 large powers in the world will sit down and attempt to divide the spheres of influence in the world among. It could be a historical summit if it happens. And until it happens, I do agree with Mr. Ihab that Russia will seek to improve its battlefield situation as much as it can, and capture as much Ukrainian territory as it can, and inflict as much damage in Ukraine as it can, so that when a settlement is reached, possibly by the end of the year, Russia would secure all of its demands to end this war, to end it on their own conditions.
Mr. Omar, now following Trump's ultimatum, Ukrainian officials proposed new peace talks. Are these talks sincere efforts or just strategic maneuvers to maintain US and European support?
Zelensky had enabled lately some of the US President respect through following the last debate. Europeans had managed to reformulate ties with US under the EU, the NATO, and ultimately the America or the Trumpism, its purpose not for US to pay the bill of defending Europe along with the Ukrainian war, but in the meantime, the US has no problem to sell arms to the NATO's country and lately to be exported to Ukraine. So it has no problem if Ukraine is able to pay such a price. So they're rebuilding the Ukrainian alliance, supporting Ukraine once again, following the fragmentation throughout mostly a year now. But now there is some sort of a return of another alliance between Europe and America. And Putin isn't an easy person and isn't pursuing a mediation peace, but it has a full of goals in his mind, along with Kremlin, and it's not that simple to allow him to gain such gains as it is going to damage the collective security in Europe. Specifically important is moving in larger spaces more than US, as Britain is more closely to Russia geopolitically, meaning we've seen some sort of a military agreement between Britain and Ukraine, and then Britain and Germany, despite their historic foes. And lately, the last visit of Macron to London, into which made several meetings regarding to political and military coordination. In general, when Macron spoke before the British Parliament, he turns ruler throughout 900 years. Such British prevail, supported by regaining the French-British ties, mentioning the friendly meeting between France and Britain made in 1904, following the World War I. All this indicated that Britain is pursuing an unprecedented mobilization for Putin to win against Europe, not only in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Osman, now Trump's earlier proposals included freezing Ukraine's NATO bid and accepting Russian annexations. Does his new position reflect a return to more traditional Western policy that rejects those conditions?
Absolutely not. I don't think that there will be any reversal of these positions, because they do not have the luxury of reversing these positions. Everyone knows that Ukraine will never be admitted to NATO unless they would like to see a third world war. So, and the Americans knew that even since the Biden administration refused to make any stark, solid commitment to admit Ukraine within a certain timeline to NATO before the war and during the war. And the Trump administration now said before that this is very unlikely and that we should take Ukraine's admission into NATO off the table for now, at least. The Europeans even are admitting that this is very hard. The German chancellor said, we never promised you that we will admit you into NATO, even though he said the complete opposite during the war, whether him as a politician in the German Bundestag, Friedrich Merz, or his predecessor, Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The same goes with the French. And also the Europeans and the Americans know that and the Ukrainians themselves even have admitted that the territories the Russians have captured after the failed Ukrainian counteroffensive in the fall of summer and fall of 2023 are rather most of the 4 oblasts. Russia is advancing in Sumy, a fifth oblast, where they are now approaching Sumy city itself. They control parts of Kharkiv, and for the first time since the beginning of the war, they have actually captured villages in central Ukraine or east central Ukraine, that is in Dnipropetrovsk, where they are capturing more villages and advancing daily. So the idea of forcing Russia to make territorial concessions or accept the idea of admitting Ukraine into NATO at any point in the future is rather laughable. And I think that the Americans are not seriously thinking about that. And they know that any future deal between Ukraine and Russia to end this war will have to include at least a de facto acceptance of Russian control over about 20% of Ukraine, including Crimea, and also a guarantee that Ukraine will be a neutral state that will never, ever join any military alliance, let alone the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Mr. Omar, do you see Trump's sudden alignment with Ukraine's position as a genuine strategic rethink or a move to protect his own image after months of failed diplomacy?
I think that Trump tried throughout the ultimatum for Russia to have some strong measures, meaning to include or to provide arms to Ukraine through the NATO, but they are not offensive, but to be defensive, sending a message to Putin that in order to stop him in the middle of Ukraine or the east central of Ukraine, and is able to tell him what to prefer for you or for Russia and America to go to the talks urgently. Trump seems that he's very strong, but it seems, as we've seen previously in the Iranian file, it's taken a very slowly escalated steps according to military and diplomatically. So he isn't aware of the world of politics as the Democratic Party is trying to show throughout the world. But more than one time that he has all the indication to go for war. I'm talking about Iran. But in the meantime, he's calming down the issue as he did in the American war with Yemen this year, along with the first truce agreement between Lebanon, Israel, and Gaza, and it was his and the ideas and produced by his constituents. I think that he's going to for an immediate escalation with Putin in a way to send the defensive arms related to the air defense system and some of the Patriot missiles that are used in defensive system, ultimately to send a message that let's go, Mr. Putin, towards talks and do not wait for the September conference and not to have talks regarding Ukraine, but also to emerge all the Russian dossiers with the Chinese issues.
Dr. Osman, given Trump's shifting position, how European leaders are dealing with this, especially that Germany and the UK are discussing today Trump's plan for NATO allies to provide Ukraine with weapons?
I think that the Europeans are trying to cope with Trump's back
shifting
and forth
positions.
Yes, exactly. Shifting positions as much as they can. Now they are more content than they were definitely a few weeks ago. At least they have some sort of US commitment to the war in Ukraine, even if it's not as large and deep as it used to be during the Biden administration, but it's better than nothing for them. However, they are also at the same time making their own security arrangements, not only for the war in Ukraine, but also to have an established European mechanism within NATO or even beyond to regulate and coordinate the defensive or defense efforts against any perceived Russian threat, as we have seen that now the French and the British have decided to provide some sort of nuclear umbrella for the European part or the European half of NATO, which is rather a very strong and interesting development because now it seems that they do not have enough confidence in the US nuclear deterrence, and also they want to jointly establish funds and committees that will coordinate collective defense spending and production. This all the Europeans are basically, all of these efforts indicate that they are attempting to wean themselves of reliance on the United States and to
be prepared.
Exactly, and to establish an autonomous mechanism of collective defense of some sort in case the United States does not come to the rescue. I think that this is logical, even though I do not believe that Russia will attack a NATO country or will invade any European member of NATO. I think this is basically an overreaction and a hysterical reaction from the Europeans. I don't think Russia wants to do that and will not start a third world war for Estonia or Latvia. I believe Ukraine is a completely different story. Yes. However, they are taking advantage of that in order to justify their collective defense cooperation. And I think that they will continue on this course because they know that the American support, or at least President Trump's support in this regards, is rather unsustainable. And even after the Trump administration goes, because they will not stay there forever, Trump's successor, even if he or she is a Democrat, they will find it very hard to re-engage once again in Europe as they once were during the Biden administration, or for the totality of their history after World War II, because the U.S. public opinion completely rejects that at the moment. The majority of Americans do not want to have anything to do with any more foreign adventures or any more saber rattling with the Russians, particularly.
Yes.
So now I think it's up for the Europeans to look after themselves, and they know that.
Exactly. Well, that was Dr. Muhammad Osman, International Relations Specialist. Thank you so much. And Mr. Ihab Omar, journalist and political researcher. Thank you as well for your insights. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes today's episode of In Depth. My name is Hala Al-Hamalawi. I thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned for more updates here on Q News. The top stories coming up next.